I'm going to start by talking about the idea of a hologram, about reality or the world or the mind being a hologram, which obviously isn't it's like a well-known idea, and the idea one of the most important parts is that every piece of a hologram contains the whole image. But what I want to go into basically is the idea of a fractured hologram, just to say why are there pieces? How are there pieces? Why isn't it just one hologram? Why are there all these pieces which all can contain the image of the whole thing? Is that even true? And of course, it's just a metaphor. It's a model. It's a metaphor to help us understand the world and the mind, which are, just, you could call it whatever you want. Reality, the world, your mind, the mind, whatever. It's all kind of just interchangeable perspectives. But it's a metaphor. Like if a primitive person who had never seen television before, and you were trying to explain to them what television was, you might show them a picture, a regular painting, a 2D picture, and say, it's like this, but it moves. It's a 2D painting like this, but it moves. Just like with a hologram, it's just a metaphor. Like we could say, see, this image is of a hologram. It's like this, but it moves. And then that still would be nowhere close, because that's something we can conceive of within the world. So to be talking about the world, everything has to go up another magnitude of information set. So the hologram wouldn't just be an image moving, it would have to incorporate all the senses, all the visceral senses, sight, sound, everything you experience, the five senses, emotion, thought, a sense of motion, your instinct or intuition, other intangible kind of impressions you have, but also memory. The hologram would have to include, the hologram is information. So the memory, the information is part of the hologram. It would be local to wherever you are. So, yeah, we can use a hologram as a metaphor to, if we can imagine scaling it up a dimension, it can be a metaphor for reality or the world or the mind. And basically, what I've been if it's obvious that reality is broken, somehow, or wrong somehow, then if you're using the model of a hologram, then the hologram is broken. It's fractured. So the first thing I want to bring up is what you typically hear said is that every piece of a hologram contains the whole image, which is true in a way, but can be misleading, because the hologram is more like a window, where if you cut a hologram into several pieces, and you are looking straight on at it, you are still only going to see whatever's in that part of the hologram. It's not like it's going to magically change into many little versions of the whole image. That's not how it works. It's more like a window where you can still only, if it breaks into 100 pieces, you can still, from a distance, you're only going to see, like looking through 100 little windows, whatever's directly in front of that piece. Like whatever piece is cut off, that's that piece. And in order to see the whole image, you would have to zoom in super close, just like looking out a window to see what is to the left or right or up or down from the window. You'd have to get your face, you'd have to come across the room closer, get your face right up against the window, and then you can see, around. Then you can see the whole hologram. Like, yes, in that sense, each piece does contain the whole image, but that doesn't mean that it's just obviously apparent. You have to really zoom in just to get a glimpse. Then you can kind of peer around the edges of your piece and see all the rest of the image. And there were two main ideas that factored heavily into my thinking about this, about the folded, fractured hologram. The first was the planting for 6 years, every 7 years, letting the land lie fallow in Exodus in the Old Testament. That was the one. You can only plant for 6 years. Every 7 years, you have to stop plowing and sowing the land. And the other was folding a piece of paper 7 times. That you can't fold a piece of paper 7 times. And I know there's always going to be, it's going to always be wrong in some respect. Like, I know there'll be some special kind of paper in some special way that you can fold it 7 times. That's also part of the point of the whole thing. There's always going to be a loophole to get around these things. But generally, this is like I don't know exactly what you would call it, like these folk wisdom, common sense, like colloquialism kind of things, like that just everyone sort of knows, or just like folk, little, pieces of information that you can't fold a piece of paper more than 7 times. And somehow I came across this hydraulic press video where he folds the piece of paper 7 times and it explodes, like the fibers in the paper or something actually fracture, and it becomes like chalk into just like a million little pieces when he forces it with the hydraulic press. And this, in Exodus, about not farming the land more than 7 years. Plant and harvest your crops for 6 years. But let the land be renewed and lie uncultivated during the 7th year. For 6 years you shall sow your land. For 6 years you are to sow your land and gather its produce. And like plowing and sowing the land, it's like folding the land over. Basically what I'm trying to say is these things, they seem to apply on multiple levels of reality. It's like all up and down the levels of abstraction. The not being able to fold a paper more than 7 times, and not being able to fold the land over more than 7 times are related. Or it's like you can fold it over more than 7 times, but the point is you're going to break it. And that is basically what I'm getting at, is that is what happened, is we broke it. Whatever you want to call it. Like the world system, the earth itself, the reality generation, so the creation, we broke it. Because a lot of the things in the Old Testament is a lot about how the creation works. It's in some ways it's very opaque, it's very esoteric, and you could say magical type of information. I don't mean like witchcraft, although it can be applied to that, but it's like the Old Testament is all about how the world system works, how creation, the creation works. And the New Testament is like about, what's the point? It's about like how to move forward, or how you work, or the internal. It's like the Old Testament is like the external. It's really just like 2 different perspectives, internal and external. Like I've done in the past about Solomon and Christ. They're both son of David, called the son of David, and it's like the material gold and the spiritual gold. And it's like Adam and Christ, both the son of God, like the Alpha and the Omega. It's like the beginning and the end of the story. But anyway, a lot of the Old Testament, I could go into a bunch of other examples, which I'm not going to do here and be digressed really far. Maybe at another time there's other things I could show, but there's a lot of some things are really sort of abstract, and you can just only kind of infer what it means. It's very hard to explain. Some are easier to sort of show and explain what it means. But basically, the instruction is not to fold the land over more than 7 times, just like the piece of paper, or you're going to break it. And it's like a progression, Like at first in the garden scenario, you don't have to plow the land at all. There wasn't a man to plow the land. It just produced. There was no folding over. It's like the whole thing, It's like if you have the original whole hologram, and then it gets progressively like more convoluted and like more fucked up to not search for words too long. And then it's like, okay, now you have to plow the land by the sweat of your brow. You folded the land over. You did what you weren't supposed to do. But now that you did that, okay, don't do it more than 7 times, or you're going to break it. Which obviously the story is like, we did do that. it keeps going. So now you break that, and you go to another level of, it's also like a fear scarcity mentality mindset that we're going into, and not being able to manage the world system properly and continually breaking it. And then it goes to another level of abstraction, which is like a financial system where you're trying to save more than you can actually even grow and store it like more abstractly in some sort of abstract financial sense. And then it's like you have the jubilees, which is like, okay, you broke that, you didn't do what I said about don't fold the land over more than 7 times. Now every 7 times 7, it's like an exponential, it's like compounding. Like you broke that, now you have this financial system, you've like incepted another layer. You need to you can't keep that going for more than 7 times 7 years. Every 49 years you need to have a jubilee and reset the whole thing, just like you were supposed to reset the land. And obviously, we didn't do that either. So it gets broken again, and it's like it's like this, downward spiral fracturing of reality, the mind, and the land, really. It's related to the earth, the land. But let the land be renewed and lie uncultivated during the 7th year. Then let the poor among you harvest whatever grows on its own. Leave the rest for wild animals to eat. The same applies to your vineyards and olive groves. And like in the New Testament, when you look at other parables, like the garden, the vineyard, the same applies to your vineyards and olive groves. It's explicitly explained in the New Testament, like, okay, you see, this is a parable for reality, for the world. Here another parable, there was a certain householder which planted a vineyard and hedged it round about and digged a wine press in it and built a tower and let it out to husbandmen and went into a far country. When the time of the fruit drew near, he sent his servants, the husbandmen, that they might receive the fruits of it. And the husbandmen took his servants and beat one and killed another and stoned another. Again, he sent other servants. This is about prophets, like the prophets getting killed, like repeatedly over and over again. Anyone who tries to bring like the truth or wisdom into the world, like kill that guy, by the people who were originally put in charge of the world. Again, he sent other servants more than the first, and they did unto them likewise. But last of all, he sent unto them his son, saying, they will reverence my son. But when the husbandmen saw the son, they said among themselves, this is the heir. Come, let us kill him, and let us seize on his inheritance. And they caught him and cast him out of the vineyard and slew him. Which is like pretty, we all understand what this parable is about, like on the surface. So, and then it goes into, did you never read the scriptures? The stone which the builders rejected, the same has become the head of the corner. This is the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. And again, I'm not going to go into huge digression, but about using the knowledge of creation or how the world system works in some kind of weird, like, control freak, narcissistic, psychopath way to control people for some reason. When there's not actually a shortage of anything, like everyone could have everything, but it's not about that. It's about control, like a rapist or just some kind of. Basically, it's just like a infection. It's a psychopathy. And then you could go into like the resolution is. I have it somewhere. I don't feel like finding it right now. But the beating swords into plowshares and spears into prune hooks. Like, instead of using the technology as a weapon to control people, it can be used to grow people to grow whatever you want to call it, awareness or whatever. This is another example of the sevens. And the seven as a cycle, like I said, like just as like a folk wisdom, general understanding of how the world works. It applies to lots of things. The 7 planets in the antiquity, the 7 vowels, 7 notes in music. It's like a cycle that it's like a natural thing. You can't fold a piece of paper more than 7 times. Every 7 years, let the land lie fallow. It's like one whole cycle, or an octave, because once you go to 8, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. Do is 8, you're at the same spot again on a higher octave. You can only go, there's only 7 different positions in an octave system. So that applies all up and down. Every 7 years, you hear like every 7 years, all the cells in your body are replaced. It's like a cycle, a recycling system, a reset system that applies all up and down the layers or the levels of reality. In Daniel, when God uses Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, and this part, let his mind be changed from that of a man, and let him be given the mind of a beast till 7 times pass him by. Or let his heart be changed from a man's, and let a beast's heart be given him, and let 7 times pass over him. It's like, it's a story in the Bible where it's literally, I don't know what it refers to, probably 7 years, but it can apply to being like, if you go down this material path, being like recycled again, having to go through the whole cycle again, like losing your higher awareness, being reset back to like a more primitive state to run through the whole cycle again. Okay, let's see if you do it right this time. Nope. Okay, try it again. Nope. Oh, you fucked up again. Okay, recycling back. Okay, he's an animal again. Oh, nope, you fucked up again. That's like 7 times is like one, you have to go through one whole cycle again. Nevertheless, leave the stump of his roots in the earth. Even with a band of iron and brass, it's like, it could, he eats grass, he's like a cow. Again, he goes out in the field and he goes insane. And let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let his portion be with the beasts and the grass of the earth. It's about like, again, I don't want to digress really far into this. This isn't what I'm trying to talk about. But being recycled back, and it's sort of like the foundation of the technology that makes the reality work is always left here. It's like the whole infrastructure above ground and the civilization will be like wiped out, but like the fundamental technology or whatever underground, wherever it is left here to let it be wet with the dew of heaven, like the water of life, and like renewed again. Like, okay, do it again. Like the Lord is long suffering usward. Like, okay, we're not going to leave the one lost sheep. We're going to keep doing it till everyone gets it and we move on. Otherwise, it's like being reset over and over and over again. And this, I'll move on from this right after this, but this matter is by the decree. This is right after that. Right after he's let his mind be changed to a beast mind until 7 times pass over. This matter is by the decree of the watchers, and the demand by the word of the holy ones, to the intent that the living may know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will, and setteth up over it the basest of men. Or it says, and sets over it the lowest of men. It's basically like, this is how the system is set up. Like, it's part of a hierarchy that is this matters by decree of the Watchers. Like, this is how it's set up. It's part of a larger system that is being enforced from outside. And basically it's not going to be changed like politically or something, or however you think it's going to be changed. Just like the Barabbas Jesus or Jesus the Messiah. Like, which one do you want? The guy who's a revolutionary and is going to like physically, violently like overthrow the government so we can have, then we can have utopia? Or do you want like Jesus the Messiah who's like just stop, like, judge not, stop lay not up your treasures on earth where moth and rust corrupt. Like don't stop investing in this system. And the people, obviously always pick Barabbas Jesus. They want to physically, like, violently fix things here, which is not how it's going to work, because it's like it's set up like that from outside, from a higher level of authority. Like, it's not an accident that the worst people are in charge. It's like falling up. It's like that is, it's designed like that. Sets over it the lowest of men, setteth up over it the basest of men. It's not meant to be it's not meant to be made right physically. That's not really possible, because we're in a broken system. We broke it. We have to go backwards. I think this fractured hologram metaphor or model is also useful for reconciling one world versus many worlds, or timelines, whether there can be many different timelines or realities as opposed to only one organic timeline, or even reconciling one life versus many lives, or reincarnation model or perspective. You could reconcile these different viewpoints by saying, yes, there is only one world, but it's fractured into all these virtually infinite pieces, or many tiny pieces, and your awareness exists in every piece, but you could say it's you're only focused on one at a time. You're completely absorbed into just one piece. That's where your attention can only be in one at a time, because they're fractured, they're not connected. So you're always only in one piece at a time. So there is only one world, but that's not you're not that one world is way bigger. That's one way to reconcile these. Or even many lives, reincarnation. Even in a biblical sense, like, or whatever, Sumerian kings, whatever ancient text you want to look at, where you could be living much longer, and it's just like one little division of life, or even like sleeping and dreaming, where instead, not like a one-to-one comparison, but you could say like the time you're conscious here in this life, or this compartment or timeline or whatever, could be like 1%, And the time that you're unconscious is not like 8 hours a night. It's like 99% of the time. It's like an illusion, or the time doesn't like match up how you think it does. It's like a time dilation thing where you're like rotating through all these different fragments, and your awareness they're all separated. And this is also even like, again, like I said in the Bible slides, like this also being the world and the land. It's like you could think of like Pangea. Like the land was just all one landmass. And that it since it corresponds to all the levels, it's like that's correspondent to the collective mind, the world mind. It is all one mass, and it fractures and fractures and fractures. It's breaking apart into all the different continents and islands, and the land's breaking apart where it originally was one landmass, one world mind, before it fractured into all these different pieces. It also obviously parallels like dissociative identity disorder, multiple personality disorder, like MK Ultra, fracturing of the mind into different personalities is another analog of the same concept. Or if you don't want to think so abstractly about it, you could even think of it just as like in a normal person's life, how they have all these different compartments of their life, like sectioned off, divided off from each other. Like they have their work life, their home life, maybe a romantic life, like their social life, or then they might have like a public, not political, but maybe that political, like public life where they would do things in a work environment to make money. Like maybe they work for like a defense contractor and they engineer, laser guided missiles or some shit to like murder. You don't have to say murder, just to kill to create massive destruction. Whereas in their home life, like those same values or what is acceptable obviously wouldn't transfer over. Like, Dad, is it okay to kill 1,000 people? There's no, son, that's wrong. Like, but that's what you get paid to do. It's not, or like stealing. But at work, your work is like corporate takeovers and like hostile takeovers and liquidating businesses and downsizing and firing thousands of people or whatever. Like, and then that's not, but you can still go to church and I'm going to heaven and I'm religious, I'm a Protestant or whatever, like I'm a Methodist, and then, or what you would present publicly, like in a political sense or a community sense, wouldn't align with like maybe you're into all sort of deviant sexual shit or like drug use in your like social life. Like you could even just understand it and as a personal mind life way like that on a micro scale, where we have our personality fragmented and divided up into all these different compartments that don't overlap. They're not connected. It's all fragmented. It's like a fragmented personality. But yeah, I like to think of it in the most abstract sense as like, no, this actually is like reality. It's actually like a technological system. If you're looking at it from the bottom, the downward technological materialist perspective, it's actually like a technological system, if you want to call it like a simulator, but it's more than that. It's like the technology of the world that we broke it. It's literally broken into like a million pieces. And our awareness is tied into it. So it's fractured. Your awareness always exists in every piece, but it's compartmentalized. And there's a bleed over between these different fragments or compartments, which can seem like different realities, timelines, etc. Which is how, you could have these experiences, whether you just want to call it like a crazy person or whatever, a spiritualist or whatever kind of person they are, that are having these way mentally divergent experiences of different lives or past lives or different whatever. One way to understand it is like the technological electrical metaphor, which, like, if you have an analog receiver for your stereo, you can have with multiple channels. Like, you could have the record player on one channel, the radio receiver on another channel, the tape deck on another channel, etc. And maybe you have a record playing on the record player, but you don't have that channel selected. Like, you have the tape deck selected, but nothing playing on the tape deck. But you can very faintly hear the bleed over of the record player or whatever. You can always hear a slight bleed over between the channels because it's a field. It's an electromagnetic field. It's not actually like it's piping through wires like pipes. It's like a field that is being generated around the wires and components. It's not direct and linear, which it would be like us. We're like conductors for streams of awareness, which produce fields of consciousness, fields of like probability of thought, emotion, intuition, etc., probability of experience, like an experience field. This stream of awareness coming in is like what powers it. It's just pure awareness is just like pure power, and it can power anything, you can plug anything into it. So all these different fragments or compartments, timelines, whatever, like all different channels on the receiver. But if you're very quiet and still, or however you might access that state, but basically that the metaphor with the receiver is that it has to be very quiet. Like you have to have nothing playing on your channel that you have select, your main channel. If it's complete silence, you can actually hear what is playing on the other channels, even though they're not selected. They shouldn't be playing, but you can hear all these other adjacent channels, which is like being able to somehow infer, experience, observe, be aware of whatever, like other compartments, other fragments, other timelines, other realities or lives or personalities or roles or whatever. If you are, when you're very quiet, or however however you want to describe that in your metaphor. Another metaphor for how can your awareness be existing in all these different, whatever you want to call it, fragments, realities, timelines, and you not be aware of it. You only be aware primarily of one life, one reality. Another metaphor is like TV. You could be watching TV, or someone else is watching TV, and you can be right next to them yelling their name and they don't hear you because they're completely absorbed in the TV show. Their attention is absorbed. Their consciousness is projected into the TV. And obviously TV is hypnotic, but it doesn't have to be just TV. It can be anything. It can be a book or a painting or just watching your cat play around with a leaf or something. But whatever it is, they're all virtual environments or dreams, which you project your awareness into this one story or this one, medium, or this one fragment by focusing your attention on it, and you can inhabit it. It's like a consciousness bubble world we can inhabit within a larger outside world. Or playing a video game, obviously, anything like that, reading a book. And so little of our awareness remains outside. So little that it's difficult to draw our attention back out. That's like yelling at someone, a kid or whoever that's watching TV, and they don't hear you. And that's also why you could look at it as a fortuitous point in this fracturing where we're in the tiniest fragment now. We're like all the way at the bottom, like as small as it can get. I guess it could always keep going, but we're at a point where the resolution is really low. So it's not keeping your attention as much. It's like when the TV goes to a shitty commercial break where the signal gets all scrambled, static, and it's hard to see what's going on the show. And so it starts to lose your attention, which provides an opportunity to zoom out of all these fragments and layers and get your awareness bungeed up out of the attention pit back all the way up to the big picture where you can observe all the little fragments again and hear your name being called again in the outside world. And looking at it that way, where like it's actually good to be where there's the least opportunity, the least kind of content in the show, when the resolution gets really low, you get down to the tiniest fragment. It's sort of like you could look at the previous folds where it's just half the screen or it's just quarter of the screen. These are like where a lot more is possible in the show or the game or however you want to look at it. And those would be higher up realities, would be like, the more mythological hero stories, mighty men of renown, magical and all that type of stuff where a lot more is possible. But in that same sense, it's like it's fully engaging your attention because it's so interesting and so much is possible. So in a way, the worst part, where the least is possible and it's the most sort of meaningless in the material sense, is actually, depending on how you look at it, could be good because that is what's needed to break your attention from it. You know what I mean? It's like the end of the cycle. And that's also why you could look at this whole thing as like the wine press screen, where it's like you're getting squeezed further and further and further in, closer and closer to the screen, where it's like getting closer to these fragments or closer to the window where you can see more of the whole picture and see what's the whole picture, see what's going on. And like I was saying about the different channels for it being quiet, it's going closer to the window or closer to the hologram fragment is like going deeper and deeper inside instead of being drawn out into the outside game, world, show, distraction, which is like if it's a superhero, mighty men, mythological story, of course you're going to be drawn into the outside. But when that becomes lower and lower resolution, it's easier to go deeper and deeper inside, which, since everything is inverted, that's like going closer and closer up to the window. It's not outside, it's inside. So going closer and closer, zooming in further and further inside is actually where you can see further and further around. You get more degrees of articulation. Like the closer you get to the window, the more degrees of articulation you have visible to you around. You can see further and further outside the window to the whole picture. And again, articulation means talking or describing, So having more degrees of articulation could also be more models. You add more and more ways to describe reality, more and more layers to reality, more and more ways to look at it. And you break out of just one, being locked into one fragment, one worldview, one belief system, or one perspective. And you can see more and more all around. Those are degrees of articulation, like moving your head. Being able to see more is the same as being able to understand, describe more and more different ways. So if you think of like astral projection or whatever shit that sounds really wacky and crazy, they're talking about being in a simulation or artificial environment. But, you shouldn't believe any wacky someone else's stories. You should always relate everything back to your own experience and what you know and what you experience. And it's not some wacky magical thing, or maybe it is, it's just words, but that's just how awareness works. You focus your attention on something or somewhere or someone, a dream or a story or a memory, and you go there. That's how your mind works. And this life is what we're focused on primarily. This reality, timeline, or whatever is our main focus, but not the entirety of possibility. And everyone knows to some extent for themselves that it's not just wacky spiritual talk, because when you go to sleep, all that's really happening is you are releasing or relaxing your focus on this particular idea of existence, and you just float off to who knows what, but not this. You become untethered from this stream once you stop paying attention to it, which is no different from deep meditation or even just daydreaming or whatever you want to call it. It's just a lack of focus, of attention on this story. And if your attention is unfocused, it's just blown by the currents of the winds. Or if it is focused on a particular idea, it will go there. It's like steering a boat or using a motor and a rudder, as opposed to just drifting or floating undirected. So each layer of reality, or each layer of conception of reality, is incomplete because it is a fragment, like a fragmented personality. Each conceptual layer or level is a fragment of the whole. And by layers, I mean like all the way down at the bottom, you have the pure materialist layer. All the way up top, you have the pure, just spiritual conception where everything's just experience. There's no such thing as material reality. Or all the way at the bottom, there's no such thing as spiritual existence. It's all just a consequence of physical material interactions, and in between you have all different layers, like angelic realms, different layers of creation, different like gods or simulations, or you have all these like in between layers between like pure spiritual and pure material conceptions of reality, which I'll talk more about in a minute. But each layer is incomplete. Like, you can always prove every layer wrong from a certain point. There's always going to be contradictions in each layer. There's no one complete layer because they're all fragments. They're all going to be wrong. They're all wrong. But it doesn't mean they're not also right. I know that sounds retarded, but they're a piece. That's it. They're just a piece. They're all fragments. And again, if you can zoom in close enough, you can, to the window, the fragment, you can see around the corner and get a bigger perspective on the whole thing. Which is why people can come through all different avenues of study or research or thought, belief, to all arrive at the same universal truths because it's like they're zooming in to their own particular fragment close enough. It doesn't matter which way you come in. If you zoom in close enough, you'll see the whole thing outside the window. Another way of looking at this, the fractured hologram model, is as cultures. Like each little square, each fragment, each plot of the hologram is like a different Petri dish, cultures. It could be like actual bacterial cultures split off from the mother culture, which would be the whole original hologram. And different Petri dishes are exposed to different conditions and develop differently. Each one is like a different experiment. Like in a lab, you expose each culture to different conditions and see how each one develops differently. So when you look out from your Petri dish and you look at all the different Petri dishes, it's like, whoa, they're all different. Literally, biologically, genetically different worlds, populations, all different Petri dishes, or all these different little squares. They're like all different. They've all developed completely separately, divergently. Or you could look at it like it could be like taking branches from an original tree, and these could all be like garden plots. It could be like taking branches from an original tree and planting cuttings or clones. And you grow each clone, each branch, each cutting under different conditions, and the trees will all grow differently. Have different kinds of light, different kinds of fertilizer, whatever. Contaminants, chemicals, whatever, you know what I mean. It's all a different way of doing experiments. These are just different ways of looking at it, but each one is like a different experiment. Each Petri dish, each plot, or they could be like animals. Like doing selective breeding. You take one original stock of animals, separate them into all these different farms or plots, and you breed them selectively. Like you breed this one just all for, you want to breed all the black ones, see how black you can get them, or spots, or all the biggest ones, or all the smallest ones, or all the smartest ones, or whatever. There's infinite conditions, and you have all these different compartments, Petri dishes, where you're breeding these animals like separately, separate worlds, and they all develop differently. But it's also like each fragment, each plot or compartment or farm, you could also look at it conceptually, like each one is its own metaphor for reality. So if you're looking from the Petri dish world, or that like belief system where everything's genetic, biological, when you look out from your worldview, Petri dish, you'll see, wow, these are all different genetic lines and different genetic experiments, and they made all these different worlds with like all different genetics. It's like a big genetic experiment. Or like the animal version, or like you could take a behavioral version and just look at it like that, like personality-wise. Like, wow, they made all these worlds completely different by like behavioral modification, selective breeding. You know what I mean? Like behavioral conditions. And when you take on that worldview, you look out and you see all different worlds like that. Like it's all, and on some level you could say they're all just thought experiments. I don't know if I want to go into that. I won't go into that right now. But at the highest level, like the Y machine is like, what if things weren't good? What if there wasn't? You know, what if things didn't work? And it's like a thought experiment of like every possible failed configuration of reality. And you could also look at them, the different Petri dish cultures, as literal cults, like mind control cults from like the MK Ultra lens or worldview, Like you have all these innumerable different little groups, cells, cults set up by whoever you want to say, runs things. The CIA or government or intelligence agencies or the mafia or whatever. It's probably easier to just say organized crime in general. Sets up over at the lowest of men, the basest of men. Whoever is running things is basically just like the criminal. Doesn't matter what you call it. It's just kind of organized crime. You could say that's what runs the world. But if you look at it that way, like each one could be a separate, literally culture, and see how each one develops with a different belief system. Different behavioral rewards and punishments, positive, negative, reinforcement. They're all different chemicals, give each one different drugs. There's a million to breed them differently, like there's a million things you could do in religious, any kind of cults, where they could even be like academic things, different military schools, different, it could be anything. All these things are like all different cults, mind control cults. And again, like going up in how it corresponds up and down through the layers, like on the lowest, like historical, literal layer of like this literally happening and like these agencies literally setting up cults. It's like that's allowed because it's what already happened on a higher level of like different races and cultures and kingdoms or whatever, like being split up by whatever you want to say, whoever's ruling the world, like fallen angels or mighty men or whatever. Like basically it's like it's like a loop. You set up these different cultures, they develop divergently on their own, and it's like it just trickles down through all these layers of reality. It's like a big experiment. The other model or idea that I've been thinking about, working on, and using for my story is the pyramid perspective model. And basically, I was thinking about, the Wizard of Oz, they follow the yellow brick road. And that is what the eye and the pyramid is actually representing, is the yellow brick road and the pyramid with the eye, the all-seeing eye, are the same thing. It's about perspective. Literally that shape of the pyramid and the yellow brick road, like the yellow brick pyramid with the eye at the top. It's the same thing as looking down a road that disappears over the horizon, is the truncated pyramid. And I'm not saying that's the only thing it means, the eye and the pyramid. It's just, nothing's ever just one thing. That's always wrong. Whenever you say, oh, this is just this, it's always wrong, because we're in this multi-leveled, multi-layered conceptual labyrinth. So I'm not saying it's just that. but that is what I'm using it for right now. That is my purpose, and that's what I'm explaining, is that the all-seeing eye at the top of the pyramid, the yellow brick pyramid, is a symbol about perspective. Basically, what I want to get at with it is that sort of what is wrong, or what is one way of looking at what is wrong, or what has happened to our minds, is that what's actually wrong is that our brains or our minds need things to be just one way. We think that things are just one way. So we have one worldview, one perspective, and we want to fit all of reality and everything we encounter, all the information, into that one worldview. And we think that there is one, like, ultimate truth. That's what we see on surface level as the symbol of the pyramid being. Like, everything's leading up to this one ultimate truth. And we think that that should be our goal, is to get to this one ultimate truth. When actually, again, going back to like the folk wisdom and colloquialisms or whatever, just which can seem super corny, but like, it's the journey, not the destination. As a philosophy of truth, that's basically what I'm getting at, is that it's not to find one ultimate truth of reality, but it's to build not a pyramid up to a single point, but more like walking a path and adding more and more layers. It's like adding more and more territory and growing reality, or growing your conceptual framework in your mind, and adding more and more perspectives or worldviews or models of reality to allow you to navigate more and more situations and understand more and more, to be able to switch between these different worldviews. So you could think of it as basically all the way at the top, you have a purely spiritual worldview, where it's just pure meaning. You're just spirit having an experience. And you can have infinite experiences, and it goes on forever, and there is no real material world. It's all an illusion. Or all the way at the bottom, you can have the purely material worldview, where it's an illusion of meaning, and it's really just a consequence of random chemical interaction or physical forces. And you can relate these to, at least I relate them to, oneness up at the top, pure spiritual conception of reality as Eastern monism, or oneness, like seeking a spiritual, the goal of your path is oneness. Or all the way at the bottom, Western individualism, which are really mirror images of the same thing. You can also, they're also both pyramids, like inverted from each other. Like, you have the one awareness all the way at the top, original awareness, fragmenting into smaller and smaller consciousnesses, which is also like that would be like Adam and Eve, and then the next generation and the next generation. It's like a top-down spiritual worldview of the splintering into the billions of fragments, or from the bottom up, you can have the inverted pyramid of like evolution rising out of chaos, elementary particles somehow coalescing into more complex forms, and eventually somehow life evolving. More complex chemicals, amino acids, proteins form, and life evolves into more and more complex forms. And they are basically both valid, but like the material worldview, it is valid. You can look at things through that way, even evolutionarily and everything, but it's full of holes. And all the way at the top, the spiritual worldview is valid also, but it has one big hole, which is like, well, everything is just an experience, everything is possible, there's infinite, everything has to be experienced, there'll be endless experiences. But then the one big hole is the I am, which is like, yeah, but right now you're experiencing this one experience. That's like the big hole in the middle of the spiritual worldview. And all the way at the bottom, the material worldview is like, yeah, all around you, it's everywhere. It's evident all the time, but it's full of holes. Like wherever you look into it, any aspect of material study, whether it be like historical, or looking into subatomic particles, or astronomy, world shape, world model investigations, or geological investigations, or any aspect of from the material worldview that you delve deeply into enough, you're going to run into contradictions. Which doesn't, again, what I'm trying to say is, it doesn't mean that the whole thing is wrong. It means that one way is not going to work. Like what's actually wrong is that we are fragmented into this 8 billion pieces, and we want to make everything fit into one way, and that's not how it's going to work. Everything is going to be a fragment, and the whole thing is not something you can express through the brain. The brain is something that needs things to be just one way at a time. And in between the purely spiritual worldview and purely material, physical worldview, there are virtually infinite hybrid worldviews going from all in between, all different layers and hybrid chimeras of all varying levels, more spiritual and more purely material. At all different layers, you have different balances of the purely spiritual or purely material worldview. Like if you have pure awareness or spirit God, creating smaller awarenesses which diverge or disobey or fall into matter, that's like a more spiritual worldview, top down. You have an evolutionary worldview coming bottom up, but then you can also have like, okay, it's a simulation. Like the simulation worldview is somewhere in between, but more down towards the material end, because it doesn't answer the primary origin question of consciousness or awareness. It's like, that's fine. You can go infinite different directions from being in a simulation. The world is a simulation, but then that still leaves, okay, but before that, originally, you have an original consciousness, and you still have the same origin questions from that point. So it would still continue upwards from there. And basically, like I said, that all the way up top has one big hole. All the way at the bottom, materially, is full of holes, has tons of holes. Since they're all fragments, like going back to this, how it's a fractured hologram or fractured mind. I'm trying to like meld these two together somehow. Basically, whatever fragment you take, whatever worldview you take, there's always going to be contradictions. It's always going to be wrong from a certain perspective. But instead of always trying to make your whatever particular worldview you're in right, it would be more conducive to growth to look for how it's wrong. Look, where's the contradiction? Instead of always avoiding and diverting your awareness from that. Because actually, you could say we're looking at it wrong. Like where the contradictions are is actually like a portal into another layer. And we're really just learning to navigate conceptually, spiritually, whatever. It's like we're in the dark and we're learning, like children, to navigate this reality instead of falling in these holes. These contradictions become like, okay, then you go to another layer and you can progress, which is like, like I was saying, the yellow brick road pyramid, all-seeing eye perspective rather than one goal. It's to keep progressing ahead. Any view you take, there's always going to be parts where it's wrong, where you're going to have to conceptually move to another layer. Like you could take the game perspective. Like, oh, we're just playing a game. That's what the world is. That's what reality is. It's just a game. If it's a game, why can't you get out of it? Why don't you remember anything? Why doesn't it seem to have a point? Why is it so real? Why are you stuck? And then you could say, well, when you dream so long or play games so long, you've tried every other variation to where you push it to the limit. Ultimately, it's like the Alan Watts thing. Where ultimately you've played so many games, dreamed so many dreams that in order for it to be satisfying, you want it to be completely real, where you don't know you're in a game and you don't know what's going to happen and you can't wake up from it. But then that has holes too. Like, okay, so then what spiritual point does that satisfy? So it doesn't descend into just madness, like total solipsism. And you could say, well, it's like a virtual reality therapy booth. Like a school or like a therapy booth. Like you've come in here to heal your psyche. But then that again leads into solipsism. That's basically the holes you're trying to avoid. Ultimately, is solipsism and being one or completely alone, which is insanity. That's like an eternity in hell. So you could say, okay, it could be like a virtual reality therapy booth, school type situation, but it's to avoid solipsism. You could say, okay, well, it's collective. There's like a body of humanity, a body of Christ, and it's like a collective school therapy simulation type situation. Then you could say, okay, but then why if it's supposed to be therapy, collective, or whatever, then why is there just stagnation? Endless repeating cycles, stagnation, where nothing is changing. And torture, like literally torture in the world and stagnation. That doesn't fit that model. So then you have to switch levels again. It keeps going on like and you can keep navigating. It's basically like a way to keep moving forward conceptually, spiritually, however you want to look at it. And you could say, okay, well, why the torture, stagnation? Well, because it's part of a higher level, like semi-material, semi-spiritual. It's some hybrid of the two, where there is just a mechanical aspect to it, and that's why you can have stagnation and torture, etc. Because it's like saying, why did I fall in a hole? If you look at it like there's always someone reaching a hand to help you out of the hole, but you say, no, God shouldn't have put this hole here. I shouldn't have fallen. I shouldn't need your help. Get away, and slap. I'm gonna die in this hole. You can't really say that it's like, you know, a torture system, because that's it, in that sense. If there's always someone reaching a hand to help you out of the hole, and you just fell in a hole, but you don't want to get out, it's because you're crying and you're going to die in the hole. That's more like a mind infection, like psychotic episode, narcissistic, like temper tantrum type situation. So it's always going to be something where you have to switch between the levels. No one fragment is ever going to work for every situation. It's going to end up being some hybrid chimera where you're going to end up having... It's going to have to end up being part of a higher level arch storyline, which we're experiencing / remembering, which wraps up all the other versions into it, and is like a middle path, which basically can't be figured out. It's never going to be one thing, which is seems like one of the fundamental laws of life or reality is eternal mystery, perfect ambiguity. It can't be figured out. That's a law of the universe. It's a law of life and reality, is eternal mystery of perfect ambiguity. Whenever you make it one thing, whenever you try to force it to only be one thing, you're stuck again. That's like the trapdoor to hell. That's like storming the gates of heaven. Like when you want to, just like this quest for oneness, if you actually achieve it, that's stasis, that's aloneness, unchanging, that's eternity in hell. And it's not like God sends you to hell. It's like, if you want to be God, if you want to be one all the way up top, that's your ultimate goal. You can have that. It's like God steps aside like a matador with the flag, and you're the bull. And it's like he steps aside and you can have that, but it's like a trap door to hell. It's like you just fall straight through to hell. Again, not because God sends you to hell, but it's partially like a mechanical system. Like it's set up automatically, right? Like that's the classic like Luciferian story. Son of man, say unto the Prince of Tyre, thus saith the Lord God, because thine heart is lifted up, and thou hast said, I am a God, I sit in the seat of God in the midst of the seas, yet thou art a man, and not God. Though thou set thine heart as the heart of God. It's like God lets you occupy that one position all the way up top, but then it's exactly the same as being completely alone. That's an eternity in hell. That's like storming the gates of heaven, trying to go all the way up to the top. That's like the false pyramid, That's like thinking it's really a pyramid with like a tip top that you want to get to, instead of a path that you want to walk along. You fall down the trapdoor to hell. The journey, not destination, configuration is like with God, or like David, refuge in the cave with God, where you have God, the world, and humanity, yourself, like togetherness. That's what works. The Word is with God, and the Word was God, which obviously is a contradiction, but it's being able to accept that paradox or ambiguity, and never going all the way up top, but going to a level where you're in the world with God. And again, it's like the garden. It's like that's a middle level, the garden, and falling down. It's like we fell down underground into the earth, into hell or something. And when you go all the way up top, I'm going to be one. It's like you fall into an eternity of hell, being God, one up top. And you eventually wash up again on the shores of the subconscious, like completely alone as an individual again. And it's like this endless cycle. As long as you keep doing that, it's like, oh, you fucked up. Okay, you can start over again. Oh, whoops, you did it again. Okay, you're back at the bottom again. Oh, you're all the way up top? No, you're all the way back at the bottom again. Like, as many times as it takes until you find this middle road through together, where you're building stone upon stone and building a path that you continue towards your goal, knowing that you're never going to get there. So it's continuing to add conceptual layers, continuously growing and understanding, continuously adding more territory, but knowing you will never reach the end or completion. There is no end. It's an illusion, but continuing closer and closer to God anyway, without ever getting there, without ever storming the gates. And if it becomes, when you need a refuge, you can retreat from the experience into whatever your practice is, where you go alone to be in the world alone with God, but you never storm the gates. You never go all the way up top, because that's how you get recycled back down again. Every layer having a contradiction, like the game layer. If you say this is a game I made for myself, or this is a school I made for myself, the easiest contradiction is, okay, why does your game you made for yourself run on murder? It's literally just like an endless murder business. Or why does, if it's a school, like, oh, it's a soul school, why does your school literally have child rape? That's like the most obvious, to be very blunt. That's the most obvious problem with that. And it's like something that's built into the system. Going back to the fractured hologram thing, it's like something that's always going to be there, obviously, to always sort of bring you back out of the pure material worldview, where it's an obvious fracture. It's an obvious broken aspect to draw your attention back out again. The purely bottom up worldview, which is the pure material worldview, is the same as a technological worldview, where if you look down eventually, because it's a loop, like you'll see I'm not going to get into this right now, But basically, you'll see like nanobot everything. Like we're leading up to where we develop nanobots that self-replicate and all this stuff. Where you'll end up eventually seeing, oh wow, that's what already happened. Like, oh wow, it's the same thing with all the quantum experiments and quantum theory, where it's like, wow, there's like an intelligence in the universe, but it's almost like there's an intelligence in every molecule and every atom, and they're like little robots, like they have some sort of agency, and you keep going down and down into smaller and smaller particles until it becomes so convoluted, and there's so many infinite particles, and the layers just keep fragmenting endlessly that eventually you just get subsumed by it. And basically the point is you get to a point where you say, it basically doesn't make sense. Okay, you say, you're supposed to realize, I have no idea what the fuck is going on, which is the same as up top. It's not something you can make sense of through one lens. It's always going to break down. Just like up top, if you ever reached that goal of oneness, you would be completely alone. The same as the bottom. They both lead to the same place. It's like all the way up top is pure meaning with no movement. It's static. There's no life. There's no growth. And all the way down the bottom, there's no meaning in a purely physical worldview. It's just pure movement, which is chaos. Like up top is pure order. All the way at the bottom is pure chaos. So in the world system, or in the creation, you could say the way it's supposed to be is togetherness. That's the way that works, is the with God, which is togetherness. God is being that cohesive force where when it's broken, or when it's not done that way, when you don't have God, when you're in what is not, that's when we get the broken system. Like the together system that works, the growth real organic system is supposed to be, the world is supposed to be feminine, like Mother Earth, fertile ground, which is informed or implanted with the spirit, and it grows up in a way that works and grows continuously. But without that, it is like in this system, without that togetherness, when it's like a competition infected broken system, it's like the earth is polluted. It's like the transgender Baphomet with tits and a dick, which instead of being impregnated with the spirit and bringing forth good fruit, instead it's like transgenderized with its own artificial dick that it wants to rape you with and have the world force a bunch of backwards, useless, foreign shit into your spirit, which isn't really you. Which is like the spiritual, mental, emotional version, or like the intangible equivalent to disease or infection on the material, physical level. It's like rape, like spiritual rape is like the world trying to force a bunch of useless shit into your mind or yourself or your spirit. Because it's like a foreign substance entity penetrating your body and causing harm, like damage, discontent, trauma, etc. That's what infection is. It's like a foreign entity penetrating your body or your mind. But again, like humanity being the three, like God, the earth, and then you have like humanity, the body of Christ or whatever. We as the intermediary or whatever are supposed to be the custodians of the earth. So it's really like the whole thing is like a reflection of our mind and an infection in the soul of mankind, turning against itself. It's like self-trauma, addiction, something like that. It's a self-harm situation, which has to be healed in order for the earth to reflect that. Basically, I wanted to lay down these two models, this, the cracked hologram, and this, as a sort of foundation for me to start my storyline. So I can go on my script and tell a story. And also, you should really have, so it's basically to put these two together. So it's kind of like the bottom of the pyramid here, like at ground level, physical reality where we find ourselves, the I am. That's where like all of these fragments collect. It's like it's shattered up high at the meeting point of spiritual and material, cracked, the hologram fragmented into billions of pieces, and they're all collected down here. We have all these different like worldviews, all these different fragments of the hologram.